It was 3 in the morning when I heard the first knock. Not a knock. That word is too gentle for what it was. It was a fist hitting wood so hard, the framed photo of my late wife rattled off the hallway wall. I heard it fall. I heard the glass crack. I lay there for a second, just staring at the ceiling, thinking at 67 years old, with 2 bad hips and a heart that already carries more than its share. I am too tired for whatever this is. The second round of pounding came before I could sit up. I grabbed the bedpost, pulled myself upright. My slippers were by the nightstand, and I stepped into them in the dark, moving slow the way you do when your body has stopped pretending it's young. I got to the hallway, and the knocking was still going, rhythmic now, almost methodical, like whoever was on the other side wasn't angry, like they were certain. That certainty was the part that scared me. I stopped at the door. Didn't open it right away. Just stood there with my hand on the deadbolt and called out, "Who's there?" And my daughter's voice came back through the wood. "Dad, open up. We need to talk." We need to talk at 3 in the morning. I opened the door. She was standing on the porch with her husband behind her, and I want to be precise about what I saw on their faces because it matters. There was no panic, no emergency written in their eyes. My daughter, 34 years old, her mother's cheekbones. She was calm. Too calm. Too calm. Her husband, the one she married 6 years ago, the one I had taken into my business and taught everything I knew, he was holding a folder. A thick folder, the kind you bring when you've prepared. "It's 3 a.m. I said. "We know," she said. "Can we come in?" I stepped back. "What else do you do? She's your daughter. You step back." They came into my living room and sat down across from me, and my daughter said, "Dad, we've been talking to a lawyer." I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without knowing what we built. My wife, Patrice, she passed 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She and I started Hendrick Land Management out of our garage. I was 38. She handled the books. I handled the properties. We bought distressed land, rehabilitated it, sold parcels to developers, sometimes kept them and leased the agriculture rights. Nothing glamorous. A lot of early mornings and late nights and years when we weren't sure we'd make payroll for our 2 employees, who were also our neighbors. By the time Patrice got sick, we had 31 properties across 3 states and 14 full-time staff. When she died, I kept going. I don't know what else to tell you. Some people stop when they lose the person they built everything with. I couldn't stop. I think I was afraid of what I'd find in the silence if I did. My daughter joined the company 4 years before Patrice passed. She had a degree in business administration, and she was sharp. Genuinely sharp. The kind of sharp that made me proud in a way I sometimes couldn't put into words. I gave her the operations side. She ran it well. Her husband joined 2 years later, took over the acquisitions team. I thought I was building something that would outlast me. I thought that was the right thing to do. I thought a lot of things. What she told me that night, at 3 in the morning, sitting in the living room where her mother's needlepoint still hangs above the fireplace, was this: they believed I was no longer competent to run the company. She used that word, competent. She said they had observed over the past 18 months a pattern of decisions that concerned them. She said the company's trajectory had shifted in ways that put their financial security at risk. She said her husband had consulted with an attorney who specialized in business succession and that there were legal mechanisms, she said mechanisms, for the board to assume operational control when a principal demonstrated diminished capacity. Her husband opened the folder. I sat and listened. My hands were in my lap. I was aware, very clearly, of the texture of my pajama pants under my palms. The faint tick of the mantel clock. The way the lamplight caught the dust on the bookshelf I hadn't cleaned since my housekeeper moved to be near her grandchildren. I sat and listened, and I did not say a single word until she was done. Then I said, "Which decisions?" She blinked. She had not expected that question, or maybe she had not expected it to come so levelly. "The Copperfield parcel," her husband said. "You turned down the Whitmore Group's offer in September." "The Whitmore Group's offer was 14% below appraised value," I said. We sold the parcel in February to a different buyer for 8% above appraised value. That decision made the company $400,000. Silence. The Harmon Creek lease, he said. We renewed at the same terms because I have a 20-year relationship with that family, and they are reliable lessees. I could have squeezed them for another 4% and lost them entirely. The long-term value of that relationship exceeds what 4% over 3 years would have generated. I have the projections if you'd like to see them. More silence. My daughter looked at her hands. Here is what I understood. Sitting there in my pajamas at 3 in the morning, they had not come because they were concerned about my competence. They had come because they wanted the company, and they had decided that this was the path of least resistance. Declare the old man slipping. Show up with a folder. Hope he's too tired or too proud or too heartbroken to fight back. What they did not know, what almost no one knew, was that I had been worried about something else entirely for 8 months. It started with a property file that didn't match. I am meticulous. Patrice used to tease me about it. I kept physical records of everything, even after we digitized, because I had a fundamental distrust of things I couldn't hold in my hand. In February of last year, I was going through the archived files on the Delwood acquisition, looking for an easement document I needed for an unrelated matter, and I found a discrepancy. A small one, the kind you might miss if you weren't looking. A commission payment had been processed for a transaction I didn't recognize. The amount was not large, just over $9,000, but the vendor code attached to it was one I didn't recognize, and the transaction had been approved by my daughter. I didn't say anything. Not then. I called an old friend, a man I'll call my accountant, because that's what he is, and he owes me nothing and has no stake in any of this, and I asked him to look at our books going back 3 years, quietly, without telling anyone in the office. What he found took 6 weeks to untangle. Over 31 months, money had been moving out of Hendrick Land Management through a series of vendor payments to 3 shell companies. The amounts were small enough individually to stay below the thresholds that trigger automatic review, but together, across 31 months, they totaled a little under $480,000. All of the payments had been approved either by my daughter or by her husband. All of the shell companies, when traced through their registered agents, connected back to a holding entity incorporated in Delaware 17 months after my son-in-law joined the company. I took what my accountant found to an attorney. Then I took it to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, because that's who handles this kind of thing. And I am not a man who does things halfway. By the time my daughter and her husband sat down in my living room with their folder, there were 2 federal agents who knew my phone number. I had been told to wait, to not confront, to let the process work. I had been waiting for 6 weeks. I looked at my daughter and I thought about the morning she was born. I thought about teaching her to ride a bike in the parking lot of the church on Clement Street, because the pavement was smooth there and there was nobody around to see her fall. I thought about her face at her mother's funeral, the way she held it together all the way through the service and then came apart in the parking lot afterward, and I held her against my chest, and neither of us said anything for a long time. I thought about what it costs a person to look their father in the eye and call him incompetent when they know it isn't true. I thought, at some point, something went wrong. I don't know exactly when. I don't know if it was gradual or if there was a moment, a specific moment, when a line got crossed and then it was easier to keep going than to go back. I said, "I'm going to need you both to leave my house." My daughter looked up. "Dad." "I want you to leave," I said. "And I want you to understand that I'm not angry right now. I'm something else. I don't have a word for it." "But you need to go." Her husband started to say something about the folder, about the legal process, about how this was going to happen one way or another, and I held up one hand. "Leave," I said, "please." They left. I sat in the living room until the sky started going gray outside the window. I didn't sleep. I just sat there with my hands in my lap and the clock ticking and the needlepoint above the fireplace, and thought about Patrice, and about what she would say to me right now, and about how I had built something my whole life and put my daughter's hands on it because I loved her, and what that means when the hands turn out to be taking. The federal investigation moved faster than I expected. I won't go into all of the details because some of them are still complicated legally, even now, but here is the shape of it. The forensic accountants confirmed what my accountant had found, and then found more. The total, fully traced, was $612,000 over 34 months. My son-in-law had set up the initial structure. My daughter had known about it for at least 18 months. There were emails, careful ones that danced around direct language, but clear enough when you read them knowing what you're looking for. They were both charged. The federal process is slow, and I will not pretend it moved cleanly or without pain. There were attorneys and depositions and moments where I sat in a conference room and answered questions about my own family while someone took notes, and all of it felt distant and procedural in a way that didn't match what it actually was, which was the worst thing that had happened to me since Patrice died. The board of Hendrick Land Management met in emergency session and reaffirmed my authority. I had provided them with the documentation before any of this became public. I had wanted them to know, before the news did, before anyone could spin it, what had actually happened and what I had done about it. My daughter called me from her attorney's office the day after the charges were filed. I answered. She said, "Dad, I'm sorry." I believed her. I don't know if that makes me foolish. My attorney probably thinks it does. But I've known my daughter for 34 years, and I know the difference between what her voice sounds like when she means something and when she doesn't, and she meant it. I said, "I know." Then I said, "I can't fix this for you. What happens next is going to happen, and I'm not going to interfere with it, and you need to understand that." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Did you know? That night when we came over, did you already know?" "Yes," I said. Another silence. "Why didn't you say anything?" I thought about it, about the right way to answer that. "Because I wanted you to leave with your dignity," I said. "I didn't see any reason to take that from you too." I want to say something about dignity because I think people misunderstand it. Dignity is not about being right. It's not about winning. I was right and I won. In the narrow legal sense, the business sense, the factual sense. The money has been largely recovered through asset forfeiture. The company is intact. I still go into the office 3 days a week. My accountant and I have lunch on Fridays. But I am 67 years old, and my wife is dead, and my daughter is facing federal charges, and every single morning when I come downstairs and put on the coffee, I am aware of the weight of those things. The winning doesn't make the weight disappear. What dignity means to me, and I've had a lot of time to think about this, is that you do not let the people who hurt you change what you are. You do not become bitter where you were generous. You do not become suspicious where you were trusting. You grieve what you lost. You protect what remains. And then you keep going. I kept going. My son-in-law and I have not spoken since that night. I don't expect we will. There's a coldness there that I don't feel any particular need to warm. With my daughter, that is harder and more complicated, and I won't pretend otherwise. We speak. Not often. We are rebuilding something, very slowly, in the way you rebuild a wall that has come down, one stone at a time, and never quite the same shape it was before. She told me once, in one of our early conversations after the charges, that she had told herself it wasn't really stealing because the company would come to her eventually anyway. She had told herself it was in advance. She knew, even as she said it, how hollow that sounds. She wasn't asking me to accept it as an excuse. She was trying to explain the shape of the thing she had done to herself before she could do it to me. I think about that sometimes, about the stories we tell ourselves to make the next step easier, about how quickly those stories can compound, each one building on the last until you're standing in your father's living room at 3 a.m. with a folder and a set of legal arguments, and you traveled so far from who you used to be that you can't quite remember the route. I don't know what I could have done differently. Maybe nothing. Maybe something. That question is one I've made peace with, not being able to fully answer. There's a photo on my desk at the office. Patrice and I, the day we signed the paperwork on our first property, a 15-acre parcel outside Roanoke that we eventually sold at a small loss, which was fine, because we learned more from that transaction than from almost anything that came after it. In the photo, we're standing in front of a sign that says the property address, and we're both squinting into the sun. And we look young in a way that surprises me every time I see it. Young and uncertain, and trying to look more confident than we felt. I've been thinking about that photo a lot lately. About uncertainty. About how much of building something is just deciding over and over, through the good years and the bad ones, that you're going to keep showing up. I'm still showing up. My knees are worse than they were 3 years ago. The hip that I've been putting off dealing with is going to require surgery sometime in the next 18 months, according to my orthopedist, and I am not looking forward to it. I have a housekeeper again. A woman who drives in from Staunton on Tuesdays and Thursdays and does not tolerate dust on my bookshelves, which I find I appreciate more than I would have admitted a few years ago. The company turned a record margin last fiscal year. We're expanding into a new market in the Mid-Atlantic. I have good people around me. I still have my daughter's phone number in my phone. I still answer when she calls. I've been asked by people who know the story whether I regret taking it to the FBI, whether it would have been better to handle it privately, to protect her. I tell them what I told my attorney when he asked me the same thing. Protecting someone and enabling them are not the same thing. I spent 34 years protecting my daughter. I built something she could inherit. I brought her in and trusted her with it. When she crossed the line, the most honest thing I could do, for her, for me, for everyone who worked for us, was to not pretend the line hadn't been crossed. That's not vengeance. That's not anger. That's just what integrity looks like when it costs you something. Patrice would have understood. She would have cried about it. She would have cried for weeks because she was that kind of woman. But she would have understood. I keep going. That's all there is. I've been sitting with this story for a long time before I could tell it cleanly. There's a version of me that wanted to be angry, that wanted to stay angry, and for a while I was, but anger burns itself out eventually, if you don't keep feeding it, and I got tired of feeding it. What I kept coming back to was something simpler and harder than anger, the question of what I had actually done, and what it cost, and whether I'd do it the same way again. I think the answer is yes, but I want to be honest about why. Because yes, without the honesty underneath it, is just pride dressed up as wisdom. What I did, keeping records, hiring an accountant quietly, going to federal investigators, sitting on what I knew for 6 weeks while my daughter and her husband made their plans, required me to be careful when I wanted to be loud. It required me to think when I wanted to react. I've heard people describe that kind of restraint as cold, and maybe it looks that way from the outside. But from the inside, it felt like the only way to make sure that what was true stayed true. If I had confronted them the moment I found the first discrepancy, there would have been no case. There would have been denial, destroyed records, a story I couldn't prove. The patience wasn't coldness. It was the most disciplined thing I've ever done in my life. And I say that as a man who built a company from nothing over 30 years. I learned something about what it means to be smart that didn't come from school or from business. It came from watching my wife, Patrice, work through problems. She never solved things by force. She understood that most situations, if you give them enough time and attention, will show you their structure. And once you can see the structure, you know where to press. She was the most quietly intelligent person I've ever known, and I think about her approach constantly, not as a memory I'm preserving, but as a way of thinking I'm still trying to learn. The hardest part wasn't the legal process. It wasn't the depositions or the board meetings or the day that charges were filed. The hardest part was not collapsing under the weight of what it meant, because I loved my daughter, and I still do, and loving someone while also refusing to protect them from the consequences of what they chose, that takes something out of you that doesn't fully grow back. But I believe, and this is something I couldn't have told you clearly at 50, maybe not even at 60, that the most honest thing you can give another person is accountability. Not punishment, not abandonment. Accountability. The recognition that their choices are real and that real things have real consequences. When I handed what I found to the FBI, I wasn't washing my hands of her. I was refusing to be the person who made it easier for her to keep going down that road. What I know now? that I didn't fully know before all of this. Integrity isn't what you have when things are easy. It's what you have when keeping it costs you something you love. I paid that price. I'm still paying parts of it, and I would do it again. Because the alternative, looking away, absorbing the loss quietly, letting it go to protect something that was already broken, would have meant becoming someone Patrice wouldn't recognize. I'm still showing up. That's the part that matters. Every morning, coffee on, files open, work to do. The company is still mine. My hands built it and my hands kept it, and that's enough.